Picture this. I'm sitting on my houseboat deck at 6 a.m., coffee in hand, watching the sunrise paint the water gold, when this woman in a crisp uniform storms up demanding I vacate this illegal floating shanty immediately or face federal seizure. She didn't know she was threatening a veteran detective who'd spent years busting scams like hers. "Ma'am, I'm gonna need to see some ID," I said calmly, noting how her hands shook as she fumbled with her plastic badge. The morning air carried the smell of bacon from my neighbor's boat, but her cheap perfume was so overpowering it made my eyes water, like she was trying to mask something else. "I don't answer to squatters," she snapped, waving papers that looked official until you noticed the typos. "Veronica Sterling, Lakeshore Protection Alliance. This structure violates 17 codes and you have 72 hours. Her radio crackled and a man's voice hissed something I couldn't quite catch. My gut told me this wasn't just about my boat. It was personal. I leaned back, sipping my coffee, already planning how to turn her game against her. I could smell her scam from a mile away, and lady, this was about to get interesting. Let me paint you the picture of how a 20-year veteran detective ended up living on a houseboat, about to go head-to-head with a wannabe dictator. After 2 decades chasing criminals through city streets, I'd burned out completely. When my marriage to Rachel collapsed, she loved my paycheck more than me. I took my divorce settlement and bought something I'd dreamed about since childhood, a houseboat on Willow Creek Marina in rural Tennessee. Coffee tastes different when you're floating. Diesel generators hum softly, dockboards creak with honest wood, and the smell here is clean water mixed with bacon from neighboring boats, the opposite of city exhaust and desperation. My neighbors became my chosen family. Buddy Watkins, the marina owner, had weathered hands and always carried a small wood-carving knife, telling stories while he whittled. Charlie and Martha Henderson, retired teachers who'd saved decades for their dreamboat, made peach cobbler that could heal your soul. Tommy Rodriguez lived 3 slips down with his wife Maria and twin girls, escaping corporate life for family adventure. For 8 perfect months, I'd found real peace. Then Veronica Sterling arrived like a hurricane in designer heels. 6 months ago, she bought the lakefront mansion and immediately formed the Lakeshore Homeowners Protection Alliance. She had the polished arrogance of someone who thought money could buy authority, wearing business suits to the grocery store, driving a spotless white BMW, treating everyone like servants. She always clutched a ring on her finger, like it was the source of all her venom. At first, just complaints about floating eyesores lowering property values. Then she escalated to documentation, showing up with clipboards, photographing our boats, measuring distances like military reconnaissance. She'd flash letters from authorities with obvious fake seals, but convincing enough to scare trusting people. 3 weeks ago, the psychological warfare began. She'd park at our marina entrance for hours, making mysterious calls while staring at our boats. During family barbecues, she'd drive by slowly, her contemptuous glare making kids hide behind parents. Her eyes held strange determination, like she didn't just want control, she wanted to destroy something beautiful. Last week brought the real attack. She arrived with inspectors, guys who couldn't tell a bilge pump from a coffee pot. They claimed we had 17 safety violations and demanded immediate compliance assessments for $200 per boat. Charlie and Martha, trusting souls, actually paid. "We don't want trouble," Martha whispered, hands shaking as she counted out $20 bills. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about property values. This was pure greed. Maria clutched her twin daughters like they were all she had left. Buddy looked older, stressed about losing his life's work. The community that had given me peace was being systematically destroyed. Watching Maria hug her girls, I felt anger surge, not for me, but for the people I'd come to see as family. I opened my old detective notebook, pen moving like a blade across the page. I noted Veronica's license plate and started my search. She'd picked the wrong opponent, and this game would end my way. The next morning, Veronica returned with backup, a guy in a hard hat calling himself Building Inspector Williams. They strutted down our dock like they were about to shut down Chernobyl. "Every structure requires immediate safety inspection," Veronica announced, her clipboard reflecting the morning sun. The smell of bacon from Charlie's boat was overpowered by her weaponized perfume. Today's scent could strip paint. Inspection fee is $300 per unit, cash only. Williams photographed everything from electrical boxes to coffee makers with theatrical flair. His official tablet beeped as he shook his head, like documenting nuclear violations. He chewed gum loudly, like trying to mask his nervousness. Here's the thing about being a detective. You develop radar for bullshit. While nodding politely, I cataloged their tells. Williams constantly checked his phone, not for work. He was texting about fantasy football. His inspection checklist was Comic Sans font on regular paper. Real inspectors use government forms with watermarks and case numbers. The dead giveaway came when I asked which county office he represented. Municipal Building Authority, he said confidently. That department doesn't exist. I'd worked with every agency in 3 counties. I ducked inside to grab coffee and speed-dialed Peterson, our actual county inspector. Pete, quick question. Do HOAs have jurisdiction over waterways? Peterson laughed. Jake, you know better. Waterways are county and state territory. Someone's running a con on you. I remembered from old cases. HOAs only govern deed-restricted land communities, never waterways controlled by county and state authorities. While I was inside, Williams escalated his performance. These electrical systems are death traps, he announced loud enough for the whole marina. One spark, and this place becomes a fireball. The mini twist hit when I reverse-searched Williams's business card photo. Gary Mullins, contractor's license suspended for fraud 3 years ago. The guy claiming to inspect our safety had been banned from construction work for lying to customers. I returned to my deck just as Veronica cornered the Hendersons. Martha was already reaching for her purse, hands shaking as she counted 20s. We don't want any trouble, Charlie said quietly, his voice carrying across the water. Compliance prevents trouble, Veronica replied, her tone sharp as a blade. That's when my detective instincts kicked into overdrive. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Every word, every threat, every fraudulent claim. But I also texted my partner Sarah Chen. Running active fraud investigation at my marina. Need backup documentation and warrant prep. We'll send evidence package tonight. $300 disappeared from the Hendersons' retirement fund into Veronica's cash box. Tommy Rodriguez looked sick, probably calculating how this would devastate his family budget. I spotted one of his twin daughters clutching her doll, eyes welling with tears, and my heart clenched. Looking at Martha trembling as she handed over money, I felt that familiar anger from my case-breaking days, the rage reserved for predators who hunt the vulnerable. The morning sun seemed less bright as I watched my neighbors being systematically robbed by professionals. But here's what Veronica and her fake inspector didn't know. They'd just committed multiple federal crimes in front of a detective who'd built his career prosecuting exactly these schemes. Mail fraud, wire fraud, impersonating government officials. I was already building a case that would put them away for years. I smiled and waved as they packed up their fake equipment. Thanks for keeping us safe, Inspector Williams, I called out cheerfully. Veronica's suspicious glance lingered on me as they left, maybe sensing something in my tone, but Williams just nodded importantly. They didn't know they'd just stepped into my trap, their fate sealed with every lie. 3 days later, Veronica escalated to biological warfare. She arrived at dawn with a new accomplice, a woman in a lab coat carrying what looked like serious scientific equipment. I'm Dr. Sarah Whitman from the Regional Water Quality Board, the woman announced, her voice carrying practiced authority. Morning mist still rose from the creek as she set up her testing station on the dock. We've received reports of dangerous sewage contamination threatening the entire community's health. Her equipment beeped as she collected samples with theatrical flair, water lapping against our hulls. She held test tubes to the light, frowning dramatically, her dollar store pen betraying her official clipboard. Whitman had a habit of tucking her hair when lying, a tell I recognized from career fraudsters. Contamination levels are catastrophic, she declared, lab coat fluttering in the breeze. Each boat requires immediate hazmat remediation at $1,500 per unit, or this area will be declared a federal disaster zone. I watched Tommy Rodriguez turn pale as death. $1,500 was probably his entire emergency fund. Charlie Henderson started coughing, whether from stress or suggestion I couldn't tell. The familiar smell of diesel suddenly seemed ominous instead of comforting, but with 20 years investigating fraud, I recognized props immediately. Whitman's sophisticated equipment was a pool chemical testing kit from my ex-wife's backyard. Her lab coat still had costume shop tags, and her chain of custody forms were printed on regular paper. While she performed her water quality theater, I called the actual Environmental Protection Agency. EPA hotline, this is Jennifer. I need to verify an inspector named Dr. Sarah Whitman testing water at Willow Creek Marina, I said casually. Sir, we have no Dr. Sarah Whitman on staff and no contamination alerts for Willow Creek. That waterway tested 6 months ago, came back cleaner than city tap water. I remembered from old cases. Real environmental inspectors provide EPA identification numbers and certified lab reports, never demand immediate cash payments. The mini twist came when I ran Whitman's background check. Sarah Whitman was actually Sandra Walsh, a former medical assistant fired for falsifying patient records. She'd been working with Veronica for over a year, running water quality scams across 3 states. During lunch break research, I discovered their LinkedIn profiles. Veronica advertised HOA consulting services, specializing in creative enforcement solutions for property value enhancement. They moved every 18 months after extracting maximum money from waterfront communities. I overheard Whitman mention partners in Atlanta on her phone. This was just part of a larger network. Their method was devastatingly simple. Target tight-knit communities where people trusted authority, create fake crises requiring immediate payments, then vanish before effective resistance could form. Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, they'd left trails of destroyed communities and empty bank accounts. By evening, 3 more families had paid various emergency fees totaling $4,200. The smell of fear mixed with diesel fumes as neighbors gathered on the dock, discussing dwindling options. Children who used to play freely now stayed inside, sensing their parents' anxiety. "Maybe we should just pay and get this over with," Martha Henderson said quietly, her voice barely audible over water. I spotted Tommy's youngest daughter drawing a picture of their houseboat, but her crayon stopped mid-stroke, like she feared it might disappear. Looking at that innocent confusion, I gripped my old wedding ring in my pocket, determined not to let another family break apart because of predators like Veronica. That's when I realized this wasn't just about fraud, it was about destroying faith in legitimate authority. Veronica wasn't just stealing money, she was poisoning the trust that held communities together. I stood on my deck that evening, watching sunset bleed across the water like spilled wine. The psychological warfare might be working on my neighbors, but it was having the opposite effect on me. Every lie made me more determined. Every threat against my chosen family made me angrier. Tomorrow I'd start fighting back in earnest. These criminals had picked the wrong detective and the wrong community. As the sunset bled across the water, I knew tomorrow would be their last day thinking they'd won. Friday morning brought the nuclear option. Veronica arrived with what appeared to be a genuine sheriff's deputy, complete with uniform, badge, and that authoritative stance cops develop after years on the job. "Deputy Marshal Robert Stevens," the man introduced himself, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh coffee from neighboring boats, but it was about to turn sour. "I'm here to serve final notice on behalf of the Lakeshore Homeowners Protection Alliance." The early sun glinted off his badge as he read from an official-looking document. "By order of the municipal court, all unauthorized watercraft must be removed within 72 hours or face seizure under Tennessee State Code 44-17-203. My neighbors were terrified. The sound of children crying came from Tommy's boat, while Martha Henderson clutched her husband's arm. Even Buddy Watkins looked shaken. 30 years running this marina, and he'd never seen anything like this. But here's the thing about being a detective for 20 years. You can spot a fake cop from across a football field. His uniform was wrong. The shirt was cheap polyester instead of regulation cotton poly blend. His badge number was 44419, which belonged to a retired officer in Kentucky I'd met at a conference 2 years ago. Most telling, when I asked which precinct he worked for, he said District 7. Our county only has 5 districts. I casually activated my phone's voice recorder and started asking the right questions. "Deputy Stevens, what's your supervisor's name? Which courthouse issued this order? Can you provide the case number for verification?" He fumbled his answers, betraying his ignorance of basic police protocols. Stevens had a habit of tapping his fake badge, like trying to reassure himself. His nervous sweat and cheap aftershave stung my nose as I pressed harder. I excused myself to use the bathroom and made the call that would blow this whole charade apart. The actual sheriff's office confirmed what I already knew. No Deputy Stevens, no court order, and someone had been spotted buying a sheriff's costume at a party supply store 2 days ago. I remembered from old cases, real law enforcement officers provide badge numbers and supervisor contact details. Legitimate court orders include case numbers and judge signatures you can verify. The mini twist came when I did a quick background search. Deputy Stevens was actually Robert Steinman, a failed security guard who'd been fired for falsifying incident reports. He'd been working with Veronica for 8 months, helping her intimidate communities across the Southeast. By the time I returned, Steinman was in full performance mode, threatening immediate arrests for obstruction of federal justice. His voice was getting louder, more aggressive, trying to compensate for his obvious nervousness. "Anyone who fails to comply will be arrested and their property seized," he announced, waving his fake paperwork like it carried divine authority. "This is your final warning." Tommy's wife Maria was crying, worried they'd lose everything. The twins were hiding behind their mother, sensing the adult terror. Buddy frantically searched through his marina permits, convinced he'd missed something crucial. I spotted a black SUV parked near the marina entrance, driver observing from a distance, like Veronica had backup waiting. This operation was bigger than I'd realized. But the psychological pressure was having the opposite effect on me. Every fake threat, every fraudulent claim was being carefully documented. I had video evidence of impersonating a police officer, falsifying legal documents, and making terroristic threats, federal crimes that would put them away for decades. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the mist and revealing the full scope of their deception. This wasn't just fraud, it was domestic terrorism, using the symbols of legitimate authority to terrorize innocent people. Looking at Maria holding her daughters, I gripped my old wedding ring in my pocket, remembering the one time I'd failed to protect my own family. Not this time. As they prepared to leave, Veronica shot me another suspicious look. Maybe she sensed something in my calm demeanor, the way I wasn't panicking like everyone else. But it was too late to back down now. "See you in 72 hours, Steinman called out as they headed back to their cars. "Have your boats gone or face the consequences?" I waved from my deck, my smile hiding the trap already closing around them. Their 72 hours were numbered. My trap was set. That weekend, I put my detective skills to work. 20 years of investigating fraud cases had taught me how to dig deep, and what I found changed everything. Veronica Sterling didn't exist. Her real name was Victoria Steinberg, and she was wanted in 3 states for running identical HOA scams. The pattern was always the same: target waterfront communities, create fake authority, extract money through intimidation, then disappear before anyone could fight back. Her Lakeshore Homeowners Protection Alliance was a shell company registered with a stolen nonprofit tax ID number. The office address was a UPS mailbox in a strip mall. She forged signatures on fake petitions claiming non-existent community support. But here's where it got interesting. Victoria wasn't the successful businesswoman she pretended to be. That lakefront mansion? Rented under a false name, and she was 3 months behind on payments. The spotless white BMW? Leased and 2 months overdue. She was living on credit cards and stolen money, one step ahead of her own financial collapse. I found court records from Alabama where she'd run the same scam on a houseboat community near Mobile. 17 families had lost their homes before anyone realized what was happening. In Georgia, she'd swindled a marina out of $89,000 in legal fees before vanishing. The smell of coffee from my morning cup mixed with the satisfaction of solving a puzzle. This wasn't just about our marina. It was about a career criminal who'd been destroying communities for years. But there was something else. Victoria was desperate. Her previous schemes were catching up with her, creditors were closing in, and she needed a big score to disappear again. Our marina represented her final payday before fleeing to a non-extradition country. I found a one-way ticket to Costa Rica booked for next Tuesday. The most damning discovery came when I accessed her financial records through official police channels. She'd stolen over $300,000 from communities across the Southeast, but most of it was already gone, spent on maintaining her fake wealthy lifestyle, paying off accomplices, and servicing massive debts. She was operating from desperation, not strength. The aggressive timeline, the escalating threats, the increasingly ridiculous fake authorities. It all made sense now. She wasn't just running a scam, she was running scared. I could have arrested her immediately. I had enough evidence for multiple federal charges: mail fraud, wire fraud, racketeering, impersonating federal officials. The FBI would have been thrilled to close 17 different cases with one arrest. But if I moved too quickly, she might flee, leaving my neighbors without justice or compensation. Worse, her accomplices might retaliate against the community. I'd seen what happened when criminal organizations felt cornered. Innocent people got hurt. No, I needed to be smarter. I needed to build an airtight case while protecting my neighbors. Most importantly, I needed to expose her publicly so she couldn't run the same scam somewhere else. The evening sun reflected off the water as I watched my neighbors struggling with fear and uncertainty. They'd welcomed me into their community, given me the peace I'd been seeking after my divorce. Now it was time to return the favor. I opened my laptop and started typing a detailed report for the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Every fake document, every forged signature, every fraudulent claim was photographed and cataloged. A text from Sarah Chen confirmed FBI was already tracking her accomplices. But more than that, I had a plan. I'd lure Victoria to a fake community meeting where her ego would expose her on hidden cameras. Tomorrow, I'd invite her to her own undoing. She didn't know she'd stumbled into a trap set by a hunter of predators like her. Monday morning, I assembled my team. Not officially, just neighbors who'd had enough of living in fear and one very skilled detective partner who believed in justice. Buddy Watkins was my first recruit. 30 years of running this marina had taught him to spot trouble, and his security camera system covered every inch of the property. "I've got footage of everything," he said, his weathered hands steady as he showed me the recording setup. "Every conversation, every threat, every fake inspection, it's all here in high definition." The Hendersons brought surprising assets to our operation. Charlie had been keeping meticulous records of every interaction with Victoria, complete with dates, times, and exact quotes written in his careful teacher's handwriting. Martha, the retired educator, had been documenting all the fees and fines other residents had paid, creating a detailed financial trail of the fraud. "We knew something was wrong," Martha said quietly, her kitchen table covered with receipts, fake documents, and handwritten notes. "But we thought we had to trust authority." Tommy Rodriguez became our tech specialist. His IT background meant he could enhance video footage, analyze digital evidence, and trace financial transactions. "I can set up microscopic cameras," he offered, his eyes bright with the prospect of fighting back. "Make sure we capture everything in crystal clear detail." The most crucial ally came from my old job. Detective Sarah Chen, my former partner, agreed to provide unofficial backup and coordinate with federal authorities. "This is RICO territory, Jake," she said over our secure video call. "Wire fraud, mail fraud, interstate racketeering, you're building a case that'll put them away for decades." We developed a three-pronged strategy that would have made my old precinct proud. First, continue gathering evidence while appearing to cooperate with Victoria's demands. Second, coordinate with federal authorities to ensure proper arrest procedures and victim protection. Third, prepare the community for what was coming without tipping off the criminals. Tommy installed camera equipment so small you'd need a magnifying glass to spot them, positioned at key dock locations, inside the marina office, and even hidden in decorative flower pots. I legally planted a GPS tracker on Victoria's BMW, using my authority as a sworn officer investigating active crimes. Sarah ran comprehensive background checks on all known associates and prepared warrant applications for simultaneous arrests. "We've identified at least 6 accomplices across 4 states, she reported. "This is bigger than your marina, Jake. You've stumbled onto a major criminal operation." The financial investigation revealed the true scope of Victoria's network. She'd stolen $47,000 from various communities over 2 years, but our marina alone had already netted her $12,700. The money flowed through multiple shell companies into offshore accounts, a sophisticated operation requiring inside knowledge of banking regulations and legal loopholes. "She's got someone with financial expertise helping her," I told the team. "This isn't amateur hour." But we found her weakness. Victoria's psychological profile showed she needed to feel superior, to dominate others publicly. She couldn't just take the money and run. She had to prove her power by humiliating her victims in front of witnesses. That need for public dominance would be her downfall. I spent Tuesday afternoon preparing the community for what was coming. "When she makes her next demand," I explained to worried neighbors gathered in Buddy's office, "ask specific questions about her authority. Make her prove every claim. The more she talks, the more evidence we'll have." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Let Victoria call a mandatory community meeting. Her ego wouldn't allow her to leave without a final victory speech. Record everything, have multiple witnesses present, and coordinate with law enforcement for simultaneous arrests of her entire network. By Wednesday, everything was in place. Hidden cameras positioned throughout the marina, evidence packages prepared for federal prosecutors, and arrest warrants signed for Victoria and 5 known accomplices. Sarah had coordinated with FBI field offices in 3 states for synchronized raids. "She's going to demand one final payment from everyone, I predicted during our last planning session. Something big enough to fund her escape. That's when we'll have her dead to rights on multiple federal charges. Tommy's wife Maria had stopped crying and started helping with evidence organization. The twins were excited about the secret mission to catch the bad guys. Even Martha Henderson had transformed from victim to fierce advocate for justice. The smell of evening barbecue mixed with anticipation as neighbors gathered on the dock, no longer scattered and afraid, but united with common purpose. We'd built something Victoria couldn't have anticipated, a community ready to fight back. Thursday morning, I received the call I'd been expecting. Victoria Sterling wanted to schedule an emergency community meeting for Saturday afternoon. All residents were required to attend with their final compliance payments. Perfect. She was walking straight into our trap. Thursday morning brought Victoria's most audacious fraud yet. She arrived with a new accomplice, a middle-aged man in an EPA jacket carrying equipment that looked genuinely federal. "I'm Federal Inspector David Crawford," he announced, his voice carrying bureaucratic authority that would have fooled most people. The morning air was thick with humidity, and the smell of diesel from our generators mixed with his overconfident cologne. The Environmental Protection Agency has received reports of severe violations requiring immediate federal intervention. Inspector Crawford set up his equipment with theatrical precision, claiming to measure toxic emissions from our diesel generators, dangerous chemical runoff from our sewage systems, and electromagnetic interference from our electrical connections. His devices beeped and flashed impressively while neighbors watched in growing alarm. "The violations are catastrophic," he declared after 30 minutes of fake testing, sweat beading on his forehead despite the morning breeze. "Each boat owner must post a $5,000 environmental bond immediately or face federal seizure of their property under the Emergency Environmental Protection Act." I watched my neighbors' faces drain of color. $5,000 was more than most of them had in savings. Tommy Rodriguez looked physically sick, probably calculating how this would bankrupt his family. The Hendersons were whispering about cashing out their entire retirement fund, but I was documenting everything through hidden cameras positioned around the marina. Every fraudulent claim, every fake measurement, every illegal demand was being recorded in high definition for federal prosecutors. The mini twist came when I recognized Inspector Crawford's voice. He'd called himself Dr. Whitman during the water quality scam just weeks ago. Same person, different costume, recycled federal authority. Victoria was running out of accomplices and reusing her cast of criminals. While Crawford performed his environmental theater, I casually approached and asked the right questions. "Inspector, what's your EPA identification number? Which regional office issued this emergency order? Can you provide the federal statute you're citing?" He fumbled through answers, clearly improvising. Real EPA inspectors carry official identification cards with photos, work in pairs for safety, and follow strict protocols for environmental emergencies. This guy was sweating bullets, literally checking his phone for prompts from Victoria. I excused myself to check on something and made a quick call to the actual EPA regional office. They confirmed what I already knew: no David Crawford, no emergency orders, and no Environmental Protection Act authorizing individual bond payments. That afternoon, I discovered the scope of Victoria's desperation through my police database access. Someone matching Crawford's description had been asking detailed questions about EPA procedures at the regional office last week, posing as a concerned citizen researching environmental law. Victoria wasn't just making this up as she went. She was researching actual federal procedures to make her scams more convincing. The attention to detail suggested this was her biggest score yet, the final payday before her planned escape to Costa Rica. By evening, the psychological pressure was having its intended effect on my neighbors. 3 more families had paid various emergency fees, bringing Victoria's total take to $23,400. The smell of fear mixed with diesel fumes as residents gathered in small groups, discussing their rapidly dwindling options. But the pressure was having the opposite effect on me. Every fake threat, every fraudulent document, every moment of terror they inflicted was being carefully cataloged. I had video evidence of impersonating federal officials, falsifying environmental data, and extorting money under false pretenses, crimes that would add decades to their prison sentences. The evening brought more community panic when Victoria announced through Buddy that a federal compliance officer would be conducting final inspections tomorrow. Anyone who hadn't paid their environmental bond would face immediate property seizure by federal marshals. I called an emergency meeting of our resistance team that night. She's accelerating the timeline, I explained to Buddy, the Hendersons, Tommy, and Maria in the Marina office. Her flight to Costa Rica is Tuesday. She needs to collect as much money as possible before Saturday's community meeting. Sarah Chen joined us via secure video call from her FBI coordination center. Jake, we've identified the source of her EPA knowledge. She's been working with a former federal employee who was fired for corruption. We've got warrants ready for 8 people across 4 states. The net was closing, but Victoria was getting more dangerous as her escape deadline approached. Desperate criminals made reckless decisions, and I needed to ensure my neighbor's safety while she imploded. Tomorrow's going to be intense, I warned everyone. But remember, every lie she tells, every threat she makes, every dollar she steals just adds more years to her prison sentence. We're not just protecting our community, we're building the case that stops her from destroying anyone else's. Friday arrived with Victoria's final gambit. She appeared at dawn with a U-Haul truck, 3 men in coveralls, and a stack of documents that looked disturbingly official. By emergency order of the Federal Housing Authority, she announced, her voice echoing across the water like a death sentence. All vessels must be removed within 48 hours for immediate public safety remediation. The men began setting up barriers around our dock while Victoria waved what appeared to be a court order signed by a federal judge. The morning mist swirled around their boots as they worked, creating an almost apocalyptic atmosphere. Anyone who interferes with this federal operation will be arrested for obstruction of justice. My neighbors were in full panic mode, the sound of children crying mixed with the diesel generator's hum as families began frantically loading belongings into cars. Martha Henderson was having chest pains from the stress. Tommy Rodriguez was on the phone with his wife, his voice cracking as he tried to explain why they might lose their floating home. But I was ready for this final performance. Every camera was recording, every microphone was active, and every piece of evidence was being preserved for what would be the culmination of a federal investigation. The mini twist came when I recognized the court order. It was a template downloaded from a legal website, filled in with fabricated information, and printed on letterhead stolen from the actual Federal Housing Authority. Victoria had even forged a federal judge's signature, a crime carrying a mandatory 10-year sentence. The 3 men in coveralls were day laborers hired from a parking lot downtown, told they were helping with legitimate government relocation work. They had no idea they were participating in multiple federal crimes, just following orders from someone who claimed federal authority. I called Sarah Chen with our predetermined code phrase. "The fish are jumping," I said simply. She understood immediately. Federal arrest warrants would be executed within hours, synchronized across multiple states. While Victoria orchestrated her fake federal operation, I noticed something that made my detective instincts tingle. She kept checking a burner phone, receiving text messages that made her increasingly agitated. Someone else was pulling strings, coordinating this operation from a distance. "Ma'am," I said, approaching her with my most cooperative expression, "this seems like a massive undertaking. Are you coordinating with other federal agencies?" "That's classified information," she snapped, but I caught her glancing nervously at a black sedan parked across from the marina entrance. The same vehicle I'd spotted during previous incidents, always maintaining distance but close enough to observe. Her psychological profile was playing out exactly as predicted. Unable to simply take the money and disappear quietly, Victoria needed this grand finale, a complete domination of our community witnessed by federal authority. Her ego demanded total victory. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the mist and revealing the full scope of her deception. This wasn't just fraud anymore. It was domestic terrorism using symbols of legitimate government to terrorize innocent American citizens. "We have 48 hours to comply," Victoria announced to the gathered crowd, her voice carrying across the water. "Federal marshals will arrive Sunday morning to begin property seizures. Anyone remaining will be arrested for federal obstruction." I watched Tommy's twin daughters hiding behind their mother, clutching stuffed animals like they were life preservers. Buddy Watkins looked older than his 70 years, defeated by what appeared to be insurmountable federal power. But unknown to Victoria, every word was being transmitted live to FBI agents positioned around the marina. Every threat, every fraudulent claim, every moment of psychological torture was being witnessed by real federal authorities who were building an airtight case. The afternoon brought Victoria's masterpiece of manipulation. She called a mandatory meeting for Saturday evening, claiming she needed to finalize the federal transfer paperwork. Every boat owner was required to attend with their total compliance payments, money she claimed was needed for federal processing fees. "This is your last opportunity to avoid criminal prosecution," she announced, standing on the marina dock like some twisted prophet of doom. Tomorrow night, we settle this once and for all. I smiled and nodded from my deck, already knowing exactly how tomorrow night would end. Victoria had no idea she'd just scheduled her own arrest. As evening approached, I received confirmation from Sarah that everything was in place. FBI agents were positioned throughout the area, arrest warrants were signed, and victim services coordinators were standing by to help with recovery and restitution. The smell of evening barbecue mixed with anticipation as I watched the sunset paint the water red like spilled wine. My neighbors thought they were facing their darkest hour, but I knew dawn was just around the corner. Victoria Sterling had finally scheduled the community meeting that would destroy her criminal empire forever. In less than 24 hours, she'd discover what happened when you terrorize the wrong detective's chosen family. Saturday evening, 6 p.m. sharp. The Marina Clubhouse was packed tighter than a rush-hour subway car. 34 residents, one news reporter I'd secretly contacted, and me. Victoria strutted in like she was about to accept an Academy Award, wearing her most expensive suit and carrying that familiar briefcase of fake authority. She had no idea that sheriff's deputies were positioned around the building, FBI agents were monitoring from surveillance vans, or that every word she was about to speak would be her confession to multiple federal crimes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria began, her voice carrying across the silent room with theatrical authority, "tonight, we finalize the federal compliance process. Each family will submit their total payments immediately or face arrest for federal obstruction." The room was dead silent except for the hum of hidden recording equipment. You could hear nervous breathing, the distant sound of water lapping against docks, and Victoria's heels clicking on the wooden floor as she opened her briefcase with dramatic precision. "So, the Federal Housing Authority has authorized me to collect all outstanding fees, fines, and environmental bonds," she announced, revealing stacks of fake documents and that metal cash box that had swallowed so many of my neighbors' hard-earned dollars. "Total amount due from this community, $67,300. I watched Tommy Rodriguez's face go white. Martha Henderson clutched Charlie's arm so tight her knuckles were bone pale. Even Buddy Watkins, tough as old Doc Wood, looked shaken by the enormous sum. "Additionally," Victoria continued, turning to scan the room like a predator selecting prey, "anyone who has interfered with this federal operation will face maximum penalties." Her eyes locked onto mine with laser intensity. "Mr. Morrison, that especially includes you. Your boat will be seized immediately as an example to others." That's when I stood up. The room went completely silent. Victoria's confident smile faltered as I pulled out my badge and held it high for everyone to see. "Veronica Sterling," I said, my voice carrying 20 years of law enforcement authority, "you're under arrest." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. My neighbors started murmuring, then talking, then breaking into relieved applause as they realized what was happening. "I'm Detective Jake Morrison, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation," I announced to the room, walking toward Victoria as she backed against the wall. "You're being charged with federal fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, racketeering, and impersonating federal officers." "This is impossible," Victoria stammered, her facade cracking like cheap paint. "I have federal authority. I have documentation. You can't—" "Your real name is Victoria Steinberg," I announced to the assembled crowd and rolling news cameras. "You're wanted in 3 states for running identical fraud schemes. Your federal documentation is forged, your authority is fake, and your officers are convicted criminals." She tried to run, but sheriff's deputies were already entering the building. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the clubhouse as my neighbors erupted in cheers and applause. "Ladies and gentlemen," I addressed the room, my voice carrying over the celebration, "every fee you paid, every threat you received, every sleepless night you endured, all of it was evidence in a federal investigation. Your money will be returned with interest, your community is safe, and this woman will never terrorize another neighborhood." The news reporter stepped forward, camera rolling. "Detective Morrison, how long have you been investigating this case undercover?" 8 months, I replied, unable to suppress a grin. "Since the day I moved to this marina and realized my new neighbors were being targeted by organized criminals." Victoria was screaming about her rights, demanding lawyers, threatening lawsuits, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of genuine community celebration, neighbors hugging, children laughing, and the collective sigh of relief from people who'd been living in fear. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation has been coordinating this operation for weeks," I explained to the crowd. "Simultaneous arrests are being made in 4 states as we speak. This criminal organization is finished." Martha Henderson was crying happy tears. Tommy Rodriguez was hugging his daughters. Buddy Watkins looked like he'd aged backwards 10 years in 10 minutes. But most importantly, I said, my voice growing serious, you all stood together. You supported each other, documented everything, and refused to be broken by fear. This community's strength made this arrest possible. As Victoria was led away in handcuffs, still ranting about federal authority and criminal conspiracies, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my early days as a rookie cop, the pure satisfaction of protecting innocent people from predators. The Marina clubhouse erupted in celebration that would last well into the night. Justice had been served, but more than that, a community had been saved. The arrest made national news within hours. Fake HOA Karen versus Real Cop went viral across social media platforms, with millions sharing the story of how an undercover detective protected his community by living among the people he served. Victoria Steinberg was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to 26 felony counts spanning 4 states. Her accomplices received sentences ranging from 3 to 8 years. All victims received full restitution plus damages totaling $247,000. Money recovered from seized assets and offshore accounts. But the real victory wasn't measured in courtroom justice. It was in what we built afterward. That first weekend following the arrest, Buddy Watkins organized a celebration barbecue that lasted until midnight. The smell of grilled burgers mixed with laughter as neighbors who'd been strangers became genuine friends. The crisis had forged bonds that prosperity alone never could have created. I found myself transformed from isolated divorcee to unofficial Marina security advisor. We established proper procedures for verifying anyone claiming authority over our community, created a legitimate homeowners association with transparent governance and elected leadership, and developed protocols that other waterfront communities began adopting. More importantly, I discovered something I'd lost during my bitter divorce and years of chasing criminals, the deep satisfaction of protecting people who'd become family. My neighbors weren't just cases or victims. They were friends who'd welcomed a broken detective into their floating neighborhood and given him purpose beyond a paycheck. The personal healing surprised me most. For months after Rachel left, I'd convinced myself that isolation brought peace. Instead, I learned that helping others heal was the most effective therapy for my own wounds. Every evening barbecue, every shared coffee on the dock, every time Tommy's twins called me Uncle Jake rebuilt something inside me that I thought was permanently broken. We established the Willow Creek Community Safety Fund using recovered money from Victoria's criminal enterprise. The fund provides college scholarships for Marina children, supports local environmental conservation projects, and sponsors an annual Community Safety Day where residents learn to identify and report various types of fraud. I also started Waterfront Watch, a program helping rural communities identify and prevent HOA fraud schemes. Working with state attorney generals across the Southeast, we've created online resources, trained local law enforcement, and prevented dozens of similar scams from destroying other communities. The program has expanded to 17 states, with over 650 communities participating. We've documented prevented fraud attempts exceeding $3.8 million and helped prosecute 62 scammers. Every success story reminds me why this work matters. Families keeping their homes, communities staying together, trust in legitimate authority being preserved. Tommy Rodriguez now manages our community's cybersecurity, having discovered a talent for digital investigation. The Hendersons became our historical archivists, documenting the Marina's transformation from target to model community. Maria Rodriguez coordinates victim support services for other communities facing similar threats. Every evening, I still sit on my deck watching the sunset reflect off the water. But I'm rarely alone anymore. Charlie Henderson stops by to discuss his latest woodworking project. Tommy brings his daughters over to practice fishing. Martha shares her famous peach cobbler while we plan community events and review security protocols. The marina has evolved beyond a collection of floating homes. It's become a real neighborhood where people actively protect each other. We've created the kind of community that can't be manufactured through marketing or bought with money, only built through shared struggles and mutual support. The morning coffee tastes better when you're surrounded by people who have your back. The diesel generator's hum sounds like a symphony of security. Even the creaking dock boards seem to whisper stories of resilience and recovery. Sometimes the best way to heal yourself is to help others. Real authority serves and protects rather than threatens and intimidates. The strongest communities are built on trust, vigilance, and the willingness to stand up for neighbors when they can't defend themselves. If you've ever dealt with HOA nightmares, fake authority figures, or community bullies, share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else avoid becoming a victim. Hit that subscribe button for more stories about ordinary people fighting back against corrupt systems and finding justice when the system fails them. Next week, the property manager who stole Christmas. Trust me, that story will make you appreciate honest landlords even more. Until then, keep your eyes open, verify authority claims, and remember, your community is only as strong as your willingness to protect it.